Well, and to that vein, here's the other question, of course. Do the collection of experts that they're working with here represent the wow, represent the range of thinking on different university campuses and their diversity of thought in those experts that are asked their opinion on the academic freedom in the country? Happy Easter to all who celebrate, first and foremost. I hope it was a wonderful day for everyone. Um, and with that out of the way here in our discussion, we also now have something I've been meaning to talk about for a little bit, something called the Academic Freedom Index, which I had not heard about much of until recently. And I think it's a worthwhile thing to discuss because we do like these measurements of academic freedom. It has to do with, again, measuring the amount of academic freedom in different countries at the universities and institutions in those countries. And again, why do we talk about those universities and institutions? Because it is where we train the next generation of scientists. Apologize, I'm going to have a cat who's probably going to be interested in the whole thing here. So we'll see her on camera too today. There'll be a few things of interest here in this Academic Freedom Index. It's a relatively new index, actually, as I've found out and doing some quick reading on it. And I think I'm going to spend a different video focused on the internals of it because there is actually a paper about it here, as you can actually see. So I will actually go a little bit more in depth into it with the paper, but I did want to introduce it with other things going on here. That involve the Academic Freedom Index. And they handily have a wonderful video down here at the bottom that explains a lot of what the Academic Freedom Index is, or what it's meant to be. And what I want to do is I'm going to play that video and walk through some of the questions that I have related to what the Academic Freedom Index is and how it's calculated and things like that, just to provoke some thoughts. And then also just play with the map at the top because this map at the top of the page is interactive and it does give you a place to go look at some of the things going on. So first, though, just to make a point, because I will point out right away, the video is a little bit old. So some of the things in the text is actually more accurate than what's in the video itself, and that's fine. Folks sometimes don't update their videos necessarily with the correct numbers every so often, so that's totally acceptable and totally fine, because they at least put it on the page here that this is what it actually is. The Academic Freedom Index, or the AFI, assesses de facto levels of academic freedom across the world based on 5 indicators. Freedom to research and teach, which you can see here, lovely little tooltips here. To what extent are scholars free to develop and pursue their own research and teaching agendas without interference? Freedom of academic exchange and dissemination. To what extent are scholars free to exchange and communicate research ideas and findings? Institutional autonomy. To what extent do universities exercise institutional autonomy in practice? Campus integrity. To what extent are campuses free from politically motivated surveillance or security infringements? And finally, the other one, freedom of academic and cultural expression. Is there academic freedom and freedom of cultural expression related to political issues? The AFI currently covers 179 countries and territories and provides the most comprehensive data set on the subject of academic freedom. The AFI rests on assessments by 2,363 country experts worldwide standardized questionnaires, and a well-established statistical model. One of the reasons I want to go look at the paper, actually, is to understand how that works. Implemented and adapted by the VDEM project. The VDEM project is known for generating sound data on various dimensions of democracy. The Academic Freedom Index uses a Bayesian measurement model method for data aggregation. It not only provides so-called point estimates, but also transparently reports measurement uncertainty in the global assessment of academic freedom. Now, one part of that I want to clarify for folks is because some folks may not have an understanding of Bayesian statistics. What most folks learn in college, if they take a statistics course, is not Bayesian statistics. It's what's referred to as classical statistics. Bayesian statistics is a kind of statistics where basically, as I had it drilled into me, posterior equals prior times likelihood, which is to say you have a prior assumption about the distribution of the data in question for something that you're interested in. You use a likelihood function to the likelihood function together with observed sample data to then inform what the outcome afterwards should be. It's essentially a learning kind of situation here. Again, I have a cat with me today, so this is interesting to begin with. So just to make the point on that, that's a very, very, very short basis of what Bayesian is compared to other kinds of statistical practice. But anyway, we strongly recommend that users take this uncertainty into account when comparing scores between countries over time. Thank you for saying that. You can learn more about our research and index on our website. In addition, this introductory article explains the design in more detail. So I'm going to go look at that article in a different video, to be honest. So we're going to look at this today here just to get a baseline primer, and we'll come back to the other stuff later. But this is just to also say below it is how new this is, relatively speaking. The Academic Freedom Index AFI project started in 2017 with expert consultation in Cologne, funded by the Fritz Thyssen Foundation. In 2019, with financial support from OSF's higher education program, researchers at the Friedrich Alexander Universität Erlangen-Nuremberg and the VDEM Institute, Scholars at Risk Network, and the Global Public Policy Institute joined forces to launch the first version of the AFI, which was released in 2020. Please check out the team tab on the website to learn more about the key individuals who've worked on the AFI project so far. At present, VDEM and FAU Erlangen-Nuremberg continue to implement the AFI project with a grant from Volkswagen Stiftung, which I'm not pronouncing the German correctly. But anyway, we'll go from here. I'm going to stop this video at various points just to make some comments. And then we'll look at the index results itself just to satisfy curiosity.
Science and higher education are key for expanding human knowledge,
Agreed.
enhancing society's capacity for self-reflection, and
I question whether or not society's capacity for self-reflection is the purpose of science and higher education. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's neither here nor there right now.
finding solutions to pressing challenges.
There is that.
Academic freedom is a universal right and fundamental to scientific progress and the pursuit of truth. If students and scholars can't study and engage in research freely, the world's biggest problems cannot be solved.
Now, this is true. You know, if you can't engage freely, that is an issue. However, let me just make one point on this, and that there is one thing to consider here. And that is the fact that, of course, because of things that happened with regards to human subjects, experimentation in the 20th century, there's a reason. That is the reason we have now the Belmont Report, as well as the institutional review boards and things like that do place limits on human subjects research in line with ethics in particular. So it's not, you know, you can't just randomly do everything. There is a certain ethical restrictions to it, and for very good reasons. And that's just to make the point on that one. Just for the record.
171 countries have committed to safeguarding the freedom indispensable for scientific research. But not all universities around the world are free institutions, and some academics experience negative repercussions because of their work. From self-censorship and surveillance in classrooms to regulations that ban research or outright violent repression. These are just some examples of how academic freedom gets stifled around the world. How free are students and scholars in pursuing their studies and research?
Fair question.
To understand this, researchers in Germany and Sweden have joined forces with experts around the world to develop an Academic Freedom Index, a dataset that quantifies the levels of academic freedom worldwide. We've discovered that almost 80% of the world's population currently live in countries where academic freedom is not well protected in practice. How do we know? The index assesses academic freedom by looking at 5 key indicators. Academic freedom means that individual researchers can pursue their curiosity without interference or restrictions. This is what we call the freedom of scholars to research and teach.
This is a critical kind of aspect. And again, with respective ethical limitations on what you can and can't do. Obviously, the institutional review boards and what have you are critically good and important components. Those are some critical limitations that remain valid. But let's say just research, being able to research something even if it, you know, even if it goes against the sensibilities of, not the sensibilities, that's not the way to put it, but basically, if you're doing research on a question that is not something the government of an area is a fan of, well, you should still be able to do it. That is part of academic freedom with regards to that they're talking about here. Though there are certain limitations, again, with human ethics research in particular, and amongst other things, with terms of ethical research practices that you think of, and that's usually managed with the institutional review boards at respective universities and institutions. But we shall continue with that.
Academic freedom also includes the freedom to share one's research findings with the public and to exchange ideas with other scientists.
This is another area actually where the notions of academic freedom and this whole idea with the index actually crosses paths with the normative principles of scientific practice. One of the Mertonian norms is communality. I don't say communism, just to not get it confused with the government practice that is horrifically bad. But communality is that particular practice of being able to share the notion, rather, that scientific knowledge belongs to all. So being able to freely share that knowledge is very much in line and critical to the principle of communality and the Mertonian norms of scientific practice.
Academic freedom entails that universities have institutional autonomy and can take independent decisions, including how to invest resources or who to partner with.
That's well and good. Here's the question I have. And this is what I didn't see. I previously looked at some of this, and this is what I didn't see before. There is the question, of course, of the outside influence on the university, which I'm generally no fan of. Universities should have their autonomy in deciding who to partner with and all that kind of jazz. The real question mark I have with this index that's not clear to me how it would be captured or represented in it is things like what are captured in the FIRE and in the Heterodox Academy surveys and in other surveys that talk about the university administration, potentially professors and faculty who are not necessarily, how do I put it this way? How do I put it? Let's put it this way. Is there any measure of the internal effects of university administration, faculty structure, any number of those kinds of things, the internal things that influence the academic freedom at the university? Or is this just entirely about external stuff? And if it's about just entirely external stuff, that's fine, just say so. But that's never been clear to me as I've been reading this, if this index in any way includes measures of the universities themselves and how their administration and how they conduct themselves ends up impacting academic freedom of the members of the university. If you recall, things like the Chicago Principles and the Calvin Report make it very, very clear that it is the individuals who do the research and therefore should be free to do things, and the university should not, with certain limits, of course, prevent that. So that's where we get into the interesting things. That's what I'm just curious about. With this, I don't see. I didn't see anything in here that talks about the internal components of the university that may end up restricting academic freedom.
Academic freedom is also about safety. Students and professors should be free from surveillance and harassment on campus.
Does that include the internal component, or is it only external? That's what I couldn't see with this. And I still haven't seen with this, but maybe it's included right there. It's just not clear to me so far as what I've been able to find reading through this website. I could be wrong.
Including on digital learning platforms. And the indexing...
Digital learning platforms include programs like Moodle, for example.
Includes an indicator that captures scholars' freedom to express themselves on current events or political issues.
That's a key part of academic freedom with this, but also goes again back to the communality part of the Mertonian norms of science.
So far, data is available for 175 countries and territories.
Again, this video is a little bit old. It is 179.
For the time span between 1900 and 2020. Each country and year get assessed by several independent experts.
Experts in what? Exactly. That's the other question I had when I was reading the thing above. I was like waiting for this video for that. But experts in what? exactly. What is their expertise? How does it go about? And probably more of this in the article that I have to read here, but
who are
just a point to
usually
make.
academics based in that country. Of course, experts are not perfect in their assessments.
Well, and to that vein, here's the other question, of course. Do the collection of experts that they're working with here represent the represent the range of thinking on different university campuses and their diversity of thought in those experts that are asked their opinion on the academic freedom in the country?
To reduce biases and improve comparability, the Academic Freedom Index relies on a state-of-the-art statistical model that the VDEM project developed for their large social science dataset on democracy. The VDEM model considers each expert assessment individually and attributes more weight to experts who are identified as most reliable. We also continuously invite more experts to contribute to the index and help us improve the databases.
Here's the other question, and this is going to go back to looking at the model there, but isn't a question that immediately occurs to me is how do you determine if they're reliable? Is that they repeatedly give you something, or is it they're not so much of an outlier all the time from everybody else who's part of the survey for that country? I don't know. That's a question I kind of have when I hear the word reliable. Well, how do you define reliable in all this?
So far, about 2,000 country experts around the world have helped
2,300
paint the most
change, by the way, by the
comprehensive
way.
global picture that exists of academic freedom to date. One of the most valuable features of the data is that we can also trace how academic freedom has evolved in individual countries over
We'll get to that actually with the map because I was playing with that and that is actually really cool.
time. Like in this example of Turkey. This data is open access and can be downloaded by anyone for further analysis. Who might find it particularly useful? Scientists, who want to research how and why academic freedom increases
quite
or
useful.
declines. University leaders, who want to guard academic freedom in their own institutions and build partnerships with universities in other countries. Policymakers, who seek to promote academic freedom or engage in international science diplomacy. Research funders, who seek to better understand the context of different research projects. And of course, scholars and students, who plan to study or work abroad and want to understand what kind of environment they will encounter. Academic freedom is a universal right and common good. We hope that better knowledge on the state of academic freedom in the world will have a cascading effect.
So that's where I'm going to close it off, just because this is only the conclusion section and it's not necessarily anything useful after that. But it's potentially a very useful index. And so I want to go back up here and actually have a look at it. You can't quite see it, but right here it says activate map. So we can activate it and then start browsing around. Like we go to the United States, for example, where we can click right here on this little thing and start to see what's happened over time from 1900 to about today. And actually, what you'll notice is interesting about the U.S. actually is the drop off here. So the closer the number is to 1, the better it is the goal here. Here, the better the academic freedom in in the given country, and we'll show you some comparisons in a minute. But 2019 is where it really started to drop off dramatically. Lots of questions about why. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to get into speculating right now, but you can ask lots of questions about why, and you can see certain change points with it. And be thinking about things that were going on in the country at the time that could have an impact on academic freedom because of all those kinds of things going on. So, and it's all across the board here. You can see it with the 4 different components actually all started dropping off right around the same time in the United States. You can also see just a general summary, comparison to other countries. And this is what they're talking about actually with the uncertainty. So this is like bars of uncertainty in here. You can focus on a region. Yeah, so this is Western Europe and North America by rank. I don't know that I necessarily buy that, but that's a whole other thing in here. So there's other countries way, way down in here, but this is the most fun part for me to see is over time, what has happened with academic freedom in a country. So, like, if I go, let's go all the way over here to China. Click on that. And you can see pretty clearly China has most definitely not been the freest place. In recent history, of course, with the Chinese Communist Party in charge, they definitely exert control over research and teaching. They exert control over the institutions. The institutional autonomy isn't great. Any number of different things. So China is certainly no bastion of academic freedom, courtesy of the government that's existing there right now. And is again easily one of the worst countries on planet Earth for academic freedom. So there is that, but there's some other things that you can get into. Like if I go, here is actually Russia. Here where Russia has, this is about the time period that the Soviet Union was in existence right here. So you can see, of course, there was very, very little academic freedom talked about in this channel, the history on this channel rather, the history there with the Soviet Union, where it was very much interested in jailing and imprisoning scientists and academics who didn't toe the party line of the Soviet Union. So there was a lot of that happened when the Soviet Union rose to power right here. Yeah, I think it was 1917, if I remember correctly, was the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, and 1918. Thereafter, the Soviet Union rose to power. This is the collapse of the Soviet Union in here. And it has gone downhill again since then. And I do believe that's in part because of the current leadership and governance in Russia is not necessarily a fan either of academic freedom. Russia may be a little bit better than China. The United States is up over here somewhere, but things like that. What about another? Oh, but related to that, you can see some of the history with governments. Where's the one? There it is. That's the one I want. Today, Estonia being one of the biggest and best with academic freedom here, having a very, very high value in 2024. But what you can see, of course, is the interesting history. Now, what is all of this about, and why does this look like this? So Estonia has an interesting history as a country. Country's borders came to be around the year 1200. But from 1200 to about 1918, thereabout, as you can see, which is the first point here, Estonians were either, Estonia was a province of oftentimes Sweden or Russia. And it was in 1918, after the Bolshevik Revolution happened in Russia, that the Estonians decided they'd had enough of this and declared independence from Russia. The newly formed Soviet Union really didn't have an opportunity to corral them back into place and to take charge. So this was a short-lived war of independence, and it was January 1920 when the Estonians and the Soviet Union signed an agreement in which Vladimir Lenin recognized Estonian independence. That didn't last. Because we fast forward a little bit. This is why it disappears again for a little bit. You fast forward to 1940, when Joseph Stalin was in power. The Soviet army occupied Estonia and eventually took control of the country again. And Estonia was folded in as part of the Soviet Union up until the Soviet Union's collapse in the 90s. The 1990-1991 timeframe in Estonia was referred to as the Singing Revolution, where Estonian culture reemerged, and a lot of the repression of the Soviet Union was just thrown off altogether. And the Soviet Union, because it was on financial collapse, really had no power to stop it. So it was a way in a revolution that happened with very little violence, actually, as I understand it. But since then, Estonia has been quite a nice little bastion of academic freedom there, which is quite nice to see. You can go around the world to different places. This is Brazil here, which is actually quite a resurgence. It used to be pretty lousy, but has had quite a resurgence. Australia, our buddies down there in Australia, relatively high there, quite far along on its path and trajectory. This is Vietnam. Not hugely great about that kind of thing, but that's the way it is. Iran, of course, also not great about academic freedom, as some countries can be. And this is from what this is why I asked the question about, what does it have to do um, with perhaps the internals of the university versus the externals of government pressure, because yes, government pressure on universities is a bad thing and it can very much restrict academic freedom. It's not a great thing. I'm not for it. I also do ask what's going on in the internals and how does this how does this index represent that? So that's not a keen answer that I've gotten yet, but I also have yet to read the article in question. So let me turn the map off. I have yet to read the article in question. This is actually it. And so I'm hoping to dive into this more in a different video, actually, to talk about this particular article and the Academic Freedom Index and its creation. This is actually the other part of their website where they get into the 2025 update with that, but I'm more interested in this particular article, so we'll dive into that in another video. But in the meantime, let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way at the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. Stay curious.